Hello, our dear viewers. You are welcome to the KTD learning application. By the names Teacher Herbert Luchamuzi, and I am the facilitator for the day. Today we are going to look at history and political education, and our main focus is going to be on the UCE paper 1 of history and political education. We are going to go through the paper tackling all the numbers that were in the UCE 2024. The paper code is 241/1. And before we look at the questions, the items in the paper, we are going to first embark on thoroughly understanding the instructions. Instructions are crucial in the exam because once you fail the instructions, that means that you are also going to fail an exam. Now, instruction 1 says the paper consists of 2 sections, that is section A and section B, and the total items in the paper are 4 items. Now, out of the 4 items, section A is compulsory. So that means all the items in section A are supposed to be attempted by a candidate. Answer 1 item from section B. Now, section B has 2 items, and out of the 2 items, you are supposed to answer 1 item. So, what does it mean? If you have attempted 2 items in section A and 1 item in section B, in total, there are supposed to be 3 items that are answered by a candidate. Now, any additional item answered will not be scored. Please, candidates, let us follow the instructions. If they are saying 3 items, we have to be very critical and very adorable to the setter of the exam. So, after knowing the instructions and going through the instructions, now we embark on the items themselves. And since we already have the knowledge that in section A we are supposed to attempt 2 numbers, that means section A is compulsory. It is even there. Answer both items in this section. Item 1. Cross-cultural marriages in Uganda are becoming more common than ever before. Your brother married a lady from an ethnic group which is quite different from yours, and therefore has half-caste children. Cross-cultural blood. During holidays, you stay in your brother's house, interact with his wife and children. Your brother, together with his wife and your parents, have asked you to develop a very strong cultural values in those children. Now, what is the task? Identify your ethnic group and that of your brother's wife, and explain the steps you would follow to develop cultural values in those children. Right. Now, after reading through the item and getting to understand the task, the first step a candidate should always take is to identify where is the question coming from. What is the origin? What is the stem of the question? Now, in this case, because we have 3 categorization of history. Number 1, item 1, of UNEB UCE 2024 comes from what we call the pre-colonial history of East Africa. Now, for those that don't understand, we have three categorization of history. We have what we call the pre-colonial history. We have what we call the colonial history, and we also have what we call the post-colonial history. Now, after identifying where the question comes from, now a student goes ahead and critically reads through the task. Now, in this case, they are saying, identify your ethnic group and that of your brother's wife, and explain the steps that would be taken to develop the cultural values in those children. After knowing that, yes, the question comes from the pre-colonial history of East Africa. Now, we very well know that when we are attempting our numbers, we have to always have what we call an introduction. Very crucial. We are supposed to pay a lot of attention to the introduction. Why? The introduction always will bring out the meaning of the question. Failure to give a stipulated introduction, in this case, will cost you a mark, because your introduction is supposed to first of all be enticing. What are you going to talk about in your essay? It should be an eye-opener. It should attract the attention of someone who is going to grade your essay. So, introduction, very critical. When you read through the question, the task that you have been given, you are supposed to read through, understand it, come up with a viable introduction of your own. So, introductions will differ, but for as long as they clearly bring out the subject matter that is normally reflected in the scenario or in the question. Now, after looking at the introduction, if you are able to identify the problem in the scenario, you can clearly also write your problem on the two lines if there is a problem in the scenario. However, there are questions whereby the problem, you read the scenario and the problem is already in your head. So go ahead, write a viable introduction. After writing a viable introduction, then you come and straight away go to the body. If you can still identify for us a problem, then that will show that for you, you are an outstanding learner. So, if you need to be an outstanding learner, you first of all need to focus on the two approaches: the introduction, the problem in the scenario, and then here we come to the gist of the question, what we call the body. Now, some of us might not understand what the body is. The body is basically the responses. What are the responses in the scenario? After you reading the scenario, what are some of the points that you can give in the scenario? That is what we call the body. Now, after giving us the responses, the points, now you come and make a viable conclusion. In this case, a conclusion might differ. Different candidates might have different conclusions. But for as long as the conclusion also brings out a meaning of the subject matter in the scenario, there has to be a connection between the conclusion and the problem, because normally you realize that the questions that you will always face, most of those questions will be gearing towards a certain problem. Now, in the conclusion, you have to provide a conclusion that reflects the solution in the problem in the scenario. So, the solution to the problem in the scenario has to be reflected in the conclusion. Before we leave the conclusion, when you're writing a conclusion, you are supposed to start with the word in conclusion. Please, in most cases, there are words that you tend to use that sometimes does not clearly bring out the conclusion, to sum up, to summarize. It is always very okay if you just say in a conclusion, therefore, in a conclusion, comma, and then you write your personal judgment. Actually, a conclusion is supposed to be a personal judgment. Now we look at item 1. And looking at item 1, we are going to start by seeing the approach. How can we approach number 1? As we have seen in the first highlight, an introduction is very essential. And you were asking questions, teacher, how can we write an introduction? Now, an introduction basically means to bring out what has been asked in the scenario. And how can we basically do this? We can do this by defining the keywords in the scenario. Going further to define the keywords in the scenario, you are giving an introduction. We are going to see that in item 1. So don't always please confuse yourselves that teacher, I cannot generate an introduction. No, go ahead and define some of the keywords in the scenario. Whenever you read the scenario, there is something that is supposed to develop in your minds. Where is the setter putting a lot of emphasis? What are some of the keywords? That is why one of the reasons as we study history is we want to look at the past and try to relate. So whenever you read the scenario, there is something that is supposed to develop in your mind. Where is the setter sending me to find information? So in this case, we are going to see that the setter is looking at cultures and key ethnic groups, but of different people. Now, going back to our introduction, you have to always look for the keywords in the scenario. Now, again, we are supposed to give the different ways of imparting the cultural values into the children. Remember, you have visited your brother, but upon visiting your brother married a lady from a different ethnic group, and you have also another ethnic group. So that means that we are looking at two different ethnic groups. And now they have given you a task to develop the steps that you could choose to develop the cultural values into your children's brother. Okay, so we give the different ways of imparting cultural values into our children. And then lastly, we are supposed to give a viable conclusion. Remember, as we've seen, a conclusion is always supposed to be a personal judgment. Now, when you read through the scenario, one of the keywords that we could identify is the word cultures. And therefore, there is no harm if you go ahead and define the cultures. So basically, you can define the term cultures in the way you understand it, in your own perspective, as long as it brings out the aspect of people being in a group and following a certain direction. Now, Here we can basically say cultures are the ways of life that people in different groups follow. We cannot say that you belong to our cultures when you don't follow the direction that we follow. For you to qualify to belong to a certain culture, that means you have to follow those people's norms. You have to follow those people's traditions. You have to sometimes even speak the same language that those people speak. So in that case, we are seeing a group of people that live together, in most times work together, and in some instances, here and there, they might even be sharing the same ancestors. So the aspect of culture has to be in line with a certain group. So whichever definition a candidate brings out, as long as it stipulates the aspect of a group, the aspect of people coming together and following a certain direction, then it brings out the true definition of cultures. Then another keyword that we could identify in the scenario is the term, the cultural values. It is on the last line of the last paragraph. Now, cultural values, again, we are looking at beliefs, customs, and traditions that a group of people share. A group of people share, for example, honesty, respect for elders, among others. It is a tradition, it is a value. A value is something that is instilled in you. So, for you to qualify to that cultural setup, you are supposed to possess these values. If you don't have respect for elders, if you are not honest, that means you are not qualifying to that certain cultures. And in this case, different perspectives of cultures might all be correct. Take an example. We have another definition of cultural values. Being cultural values are the things a group of people think are important. So, if a certain group of people think that something is important, that means they will be following always that direction. For example, a certain group of people might think that work is so important. That is their cultural value. So for you to qualify to be under that group, that means you are supposed to work. If another group values religion, for example, in the past, we used to have the African traditional religion. People would always adore. So you realize that the people that would always adore to that cultural value, they would always practice the African traditional religion. If at all it comes to family. So, basically, defining cultural values, we are looking at the aspects of following a certain direction. A certain group following a certain direction. It might be in the aspect of religion, it might be in the aspect of work, it might be in the aspect of family. So, whichever definition that you try to bring out is supposed to show the aspect of a group, the aspect of the tradition. There is supposed to be an aspect of a belief. Something that could connect, something that could bring all people together. So, please, whenever we talk of an introduction, I want us to always reflect, read again the scenario, and basically come and define some of the key concepts in the scenario. They will always give you a baseline of what you are supposed to write in your introduction. So basically, you could come and define for us what cultures are, and then you could also define for us what values are. These are beliefs that are possessed by a certain group of people, and then you come and try to bring in the aspect of cultural values. In this case, we are not going to limit ourselves when it comes to a definition. However, learners have different understandings. But I've told you, as long as you bring in the major aspects, there are some of the major aspects in some of these definitions, then you'll get marks. Okay, now back to our item 1. I will reread the question. Identify your ethnic group and that of your brother's wife, and explain the steps you would follow to develop the cultural values in those children. Now, for instance, I'm going to take an example. My ethnic group, I am a Muganda. Now, my brother's wife is a Munyankole. Now, these are the two different ethnic groups that we are going to base on while writing our essay. So, the first step is we have identified our different ethnic groups. And when you look at these two ethnic groups, these two ethnic groups have different customs, norms, and values. Now, for you as a candidate, you have a task of trying to make sure that your brother's children try to multitask, because they are saying they are during your holidays, you stay at your brother's house, interact with his wife and children. So, you have gone to your brother's house. But when you go to your brother's house, for you, your brother is a Muganda, and the wife to your brother is a Munyankole. But again, there is the need to instill the values and cultures into these children that are being in the lead of two different ethnic groups. So basically, the question is asking us the steps that you would follow to ensure that these children are able to learn the different cultural values, being that for them they are Africans. They are either Banyankole or they are either Baganda. Now, the first step that we would use is to introduce the cultural stories and the traditions. Now, candidates, there is what we call the HK. Whenever you are writing the point is always supposed to reflect on the first line. Make sure that the point reflects on the first two lines. That is the HK, the historical thinking. What is the point? What are you trying to insinuate? So, always make sure that the point appears on the first two lines. Now, in this case, our point is introduce the cultural stories and the traditions. What are we trying to solve? We are trying to come up with steps that we would follow to make sure that these children possess the cultural values, being that they are coming from cross marriages, cross cultural blood. Now, the first step we have said, introduce the culture, stories, and the tradition. What is the relevance of introducing these stories and traditions to these children? The relevance is, now this is the relevance. The relevance. Some of you call it the HT, the historical thinking. Now, after introducing these stories, what is the essence? What is the relevance? This will help the children learn about their cultures through the stories, myths, and the traditions that are passed down by the family and the community. Ladies and gentlemen, whenever we are giving a point, we have to begin with a point. In most cases, it is called the HK. We have to include in the HT. That is the historical thinking. What is the relevance? Now, in this case, you have told the children the stories. And for us, we are Baganda. Our origin is traced from the coming of Chintu in Buganda. What is the relevance of that? What is the impact? That is what we started with. In the first phase, we said, as you are reading the scenario, you are supposed to always establish where is the problem. Now, after establishing the problem, you've gotten the solution. But what is the relevance? Now, the relevance is the children will be able to learn about the different cultures. How do they learn about these different cultures? Is through the oral traditions. In the past, they would always gather children around the fireplaces, teach them, introduce them to their cultures, engulf them, tell them the do's and the don'ts of their cultures. So, what was always the essence? The essence was to develop these cultural values into the children. So, the first step that would be taken is to introduce these cultural stories and traditions to the children. So, our HK is there, our point is there, and our HT is there, the relevance. Please always do not forget to bring out the relevance or the outcome. Number 2, as we very well know, that when you are writing history, history is supposed to be written in paragraph form. Dear candidates, when you are writing your responses, do not jump lines. What you do, write in a paragraph form. Leave some space in the margin and start from some desirable, away from the margin. There is a mistake of always jumping lines. Ladies and gentlemen, in history, we don't jump lines, but we write history in the paragraph form. Our next point is lead by example. Now, in this case, you realize there is no way you are going to be imparting cultural values into these students without you leading as an example. You as a family, you as a brother, you are always supposed to lead as an example. In which way? For example, take off time and speak your local language. But you realize nowadays when we meet in family gatherings or even in our families, all what we use is English. Now, when will children learn the what? Learn their language. So, the point of reading as an example, you could basically explain it in a way that this is usually done as children imitate. Whenever you speak your language, the children are able to imitate it. It is like a born child. They are able to retain some of those words in their minds. So as time goes on, they go on to imitate the language and they also try to speak the language. So, if you want to develop cultural values in these children, you have to lead by example and you have to also speak the language so that they can go on and imitating the way you dress, the way you eat. Children always imitate. Children are always in position to copy in simple terms. They copy what you do. If you are eating and you eat as well as talking, children will copy that. That is imitation. If you are fond of abusing, children will also imitate that. If you are fond of saying bad words, children will imitate that. So, leading by an example is also a step that can be taken because we are seeing that the children will end up imitating what is transpiring in the family. So, that is our point and that is our HK. Now, by practicing cultural values like honesty and honesty in the community, adults can guide their children towards towards adapting these values. What values are transpiring in the community? Actually, you realize children will not only imitate the family, they will imitate the community. So, if the community is engaging in some unlawful activities that don't clearly stipulate the cultural values, the children will not imitate them. But if the children are able to establish that, oh, in our community, this is how business is done, this is how the ceremonies are conducted, this is how marriage is conducted, you realize at the end of the day, children will be able to imitate what the community does. And in that case, you realize that the adults in the community will also be playing a role. So that qualifies our answer to get a mark of relevance, or what we call the HT. Our HK is here being the point. Our HT is also here being the thinking. What is the outcome? By practicing these cultural values like honesty in the community, adults can guide their children towards adapting to these values. We can also bring in the aspect of bringing cultural activities closer to the children. This could be basically done when you introduce some of these cultural activities in as far as the children are concerned. For example, having identified that we are having two ethnic groups, we are looking at the Baganda, we are also looking at the Banyankole. Now, you could as well try to bring in the aspect of, for example, Ekisakate. Ekisakate being one of the activities that can be done. We could also introduce the children onto certain Baganda ceremonies such as Wanjula, among others. Why? You realize when you bring such cultural activities, when you introduce such cultural activities onto the children, they will always make the learners aware of some of the cultural norms of their different cultures. Being that the problem that you are trying to address is of two cross-blood and cultures, you could basically introduce Ekisakate. You could basically take these children to learn the traditional dances of the Baganda, even vis-a-vis the ones of the Banyankole. At one point, you could also take these children to a traditional marriage, to attend a traditional marriage, such that they could establish and know, oh, in our cultures, this is how marriages are conducted. So the point that we are trying to bring out here is introducing or bringing in cultural activities as being one of the steps. So our HK then qualifies to fall there. Now, what is the relevance? What is the relevance of bringing in the cultural activities? Something very crucial is that we had not yet highlighted are the examples. Now, when you are writing your response, please always ensure that there is an example. At first we had the peer. We are looking at the peer, the point, the example. In most cases you can start with the explanation, the example, and then the relevance. So whichever response that you give, clearly show the example, clearly show the explanation, clearly show the points, and also show the relevance, or what we call the application. So in this case, you realize at least we have given you two examples. We are looking at the cultural activities, and in this case we are saying the cultural activities include the music, dance, and drama. Art is also inclusive. Now, what is the relevance of introducing the cultural activities that we have seen? The relevance is it will help them connect with the cultural heritage in a fun way. Children always want to learn in a fun way. When they are introduced to music, deep down inside them, they will be learning, but when they are learning in a very funny way. Now, our HK is taken care of, our HT is taken care of, and also our HA, what we call the historical application. Always bear in mind that the issue of an example, at least always go ahead and provide 2 or more examples when you are always writing your response. Continuing. Another response we could give is, as one of the steps to follow while we are developing cultural values in these children, is to encourage language learning. Now, you realize language is a part and parcel of our culture. Now, in this case, we use 2 case studies. We use the case study of the Baganda and the case study of the Banyankole. Now, when you come to visit your brother, in that due course, as you are interacting with your brother's children, you realize at the end of the day, it is very vital for you to teach these children the language. Now in this case, that is the Luganda. Try as much as you can. You could try as much as you can to introduce this language to Alana. Why? Language is part and parcel of our cultures, values, and customs. So in this case, our HK will always lie here. Our point is encourage language learning. That is the point. Now, what is the explanation? What is the essence of the language? What is the relevance? That is what we term as the historical thinking, the explanation. What is the explanation? Language is an important part of culture. Language is an important part of culture. So, you cannot say that you belong to that culture when you cannot speak their language. So, as a step that can be undertaken by you who has come to visit this family, teaching children would be a very, very justifiable step. So, language is an important part of culture because it encourages children to speak their native language. Because it encourages the children to speak their native language. If you recall, in our definition, we said, saying that you belong to that certain culture group, that one should be a group of people that either have the common belief, have the common customs, have the common values, or in this case, it can be a language. So, our point is encouraging language learning. What is the importance? Language is an important part of our culture because it encourages children to speak their native language. What is the relevance? The relevance is the HA. The historical application. What is the application? What will be the outcome? This in turn will help them to connect with their roots. Speaking your native language enables you to connect to your roots. Children are able to start tracing where they come from. Children are able to start tracing their ancestors, and that is done through speaking the native languages. Now, another response we can talk about is celebrating cultural holidays. Celebrating cultural holidays and customs. That is our HK. Ladies and gentlemen, we have given a sample here. But in your case, when you are attempting the scenarios and the tasks, please, it is advisable that you give more than at least a minimum of 10 responses. Why? Because at the end of the day, you realize out of some people that, I don't want to call it lazy, some people might give 5. So out of the 5 that you might give, you might find there are only 2 responses that depict the HK, the HT, and the HA. So in this case, if one of your responses is lacking the HT and the HA, that means your response will not be correct. And in some cases, if your response lacks the HK, that means that response is also not correct. That is why it is advisable for you to write more responses. By writing more responses, it means you are giving a chance to the examiner, to the assessor, now to choose from which response he or she can add a mark. So that is why, at least if you are able to raise 10 well-explained responses bearing the HK, bearing the HT, and in some cases at least 5 or 4 that has the HA, then you're on the right side. Let us continue. Now, celebrating cultural holidays and customs, we have said this is our HK. HK means our historical knowledge or our point. That is our point. What is the relevance? What is the historical thinking? The historical thinking is this helps children feel connected to their cultures and understanding their values behind these traditions. So we are understanding our values. Why? Because we are able to attend to these public holidays and the customs. Reflecting back to our case studies, the 2 case studies that we used, the Baganda and the Banyankole, we are saying take off time and take the children when they are crowning the Kabaka. When the Kabaka is celebrating birthdays, there are lots of ceremonies that are always organized in Bulange. Kabaka's birthday run. Let the children feel, let the children be exposed in that way. They will be able to learn that, oh, our customs exist. Oh, on such and such a day, they organize the Kabaka's birthday run. They are able to know various traditions according to their cultures, and that will make them feel at home. Like as I've said, please always make sure that there are minimum of 10 well-explained responses. What is the rationale? The rationale is sometimes you might decide to give few, but even among the few that you have given, some 2, 3 responses are not right. So to be on a safer side, what do? Always write very many well-explained, such that the assessor will get alternatives from where he or she can place a tick. Now, in conclusion, the conclusion when we were starting, we said is just a personal judgment. Now, if I'm to read the question, identify your ethnic group and that of your brother's wife. We did that. Explain the steps you will follow to develop the cultural values in those children. Now, when you are concluding You are supposed to say I. And we said when you are writing a conclusion, we are supposed to start with a word in a conclusion. To sum up, in addition to this, please first drop all those other statements that you use while concluding and use the word in a conclusion, comma. I would use cultural stories, I would use myths, I would use riddles to help the children of my brother connect with their cultural heritage, full stop. Or another person would say in a conclusion, comma, I would make sure that children are taken to their parents or grandparents' home to learn about their family customs and tradition. Remember, we have said a conclusion is personal, but for as long as it depicts some of the information that is being portrayed in the scenario, then it qualifies to be a valid conclusion. Now in this case, we can use these two as our examples. Being the first one, we are saying in conclusion, I would use the cultural stories, myths, riddles to help the children connect with their cultural heritage. Or another person could say in conclusion, I would make sure that the children are taken to their parents or grandparents' home to learn about the family tradition. Don't forget, a conclusion is personal. It is your personal judgment. Subscribe to KTD Learning Application for more information. Bye-bye.